David, I can see you've popped up back on my screen again. It's time to hand back to you. Nice to see you again. Hand time back to you to learn from best practice from our European neighbours. I know that all of your panellists are waiting in the wings, so I shall let you crack on.
Okay, thanks, Nikki, and thanks everyone for joining us for this session within SHREC, where we'll be bringing an international element to the conference. So I'd first of all like to introduce my two panelists this afternoon. The first is Jøran Sandvik, who is joining us from Norway. Jøran is a partner in the Norwegian law firm Haavind, specialising in renewable energy work. So welcome, Jøran. And the second is David Scrimgeour, who is the principal of DS Consulting, a Scottish lawyer who's been living and working in Munich for the last 30 years and has been heavily involved in strategic links between companies in Scotland and Germany. So welcome to you, David. And over the next 30 minutes, we'll be hearing about how renewable energy has developed in their countries, how those countries are transitioning to deal with the climate change emergency, and hearing also about some particular technologies which are also important for Scotland. So just to get started right away, Jøran, could you start by telling us a bit about Norway's energy split between renewables and oil and gas, and what sort of renewable technologies have been developed up to now?
Yeah, sure, David. Thank you, and thanks for having me on the conference. Electricity production in Norway is actually 98% renewable. So it's the highest share in Europe. So it's a good starting point for Norway there. It's about 140, 150 terawatt hours a year altogether. This includes largely hydropower. Hydropower, of course, is a big part of how Norway is built overall. And then we have the onshore wind. It's about 90% hydro and 10% onshore wind as of today. I think it's important on hydro to mention that this is to a large extent adjustable production through the use of reservoirs. We are kind of lucky that way. So this implies storage possibilities where production quickly can be adjusted up and down against demand. So, and at the same time, this is, of course, a good match for non-adjustable production, such as wind power. On onshore wind, this has been growing rapidly over the last 6 to 8, maybe 10 years. It's 10% now, but there's a lot under construction. So during this year, there will be 50% of the total production in Norway. I've been listening a bit to the conference, and I hear that we have some of the same challenges on wind power. Wind power, onshore wind in Norway is actually paused now due to protests. So we have a quite strong, what should we call it, is an impact on local nature versus the climate threat debate going on. It's been quite intense. So let's see how this will be. As of now, the onshore wind is on a pause, I would say. So and the last thing I would like to mention now is that Norway is to a large extent electrified already. We use electricity in private households. So there's very little gas used for heating in private households. So I guess that's different from most other countries. Also in the transport sector, especially for normal cars, we have electrification to a large extent. As a curiosity, I can mention that last year the most sold car in Norway was an electrical car. It was the Audi e-tron, and the year before it was the Tesla Model 3. So that's kind of special, I guess. And we also have quite a few oil and gas facilities electrified already. Thank you.
Okay, that's interesting. So some areas are obviously well ahead of us, Jøran, and some perhaps behind us. David, afternoon, turning to you. So could you really answer the same question and tell us a bit about how renewables have developed in Germany?
Hi, thanks for inviting me, David, and hello to everyone from sunny Munich at the moment. I need to put this in context. We're talking about Norway, we're talking about Scotland. This is about Germany, which has a population of 82 million. So the numbers are large, or they signify large numbers. So for example, 46% of electricity demand in Germany comes from renewables as compared to 90 or over 90, as we've just heard from Norway. That's 17% of total energy demand from renewables, which is quite comparable with 21% in Scotland. The issues in Germany in the so-called Energiewende, which is the energy transition that's been going on since the early 2000s, are really about decarbonising heat, so the same problem as we have in the UK. And a particular issue in Germany is decarbonisation of industry, which is responsible for about 20% of Germany's CO2 emissions. In terms of the way onshore wind has developed, it was actually really fueled by the automotive component industry moving into manufacturing components for turbines. So as everybody in this session probably is aware, there's a huge number of turbines produced in Germany by companies like Siemens, Nordex, Enercon. Currently, there's 55 gigawatts of onshore wind installed in Germany, 5 gigawatts offshore, comparable to 8 gigawatts in Scotland, 1 gigawatt offshore in Scotland. So I think you have to look at two aspects to the onshore wind side of things, and offshore now, is that you have the installed wind in Germany, but you have huge amounts of installed wind using the German exported turbines. In terms of solar, that's about 10% of power demand in Germany. It was a manufacturing success in the beginning, but China overtook that in terms of cost. There's been a very successful rollout of products for residential use, so energy systems for houses, especially in the southern part of Germany, and that's still increasing. Biomass is kind of done. It's a huge development in Germany. There are 14,000 biomass plants. It was heavily subsidized. That's also producing about 10% of the renewable power supply in Germany. But in that case, there are increasing issues with nitrates and with land use for feedstock causing problems. So I would say, in general, the onshore wind, which is the key development to date, has serious problems, as in Norway to a lesser extent. Fortunately, in Scotland, there is a lot of NIMBYism and opposition to onshore wind. The other key problem for the part of Germany where I live is that there are no interconnectors yet to bring the existing and planned offshore wind power down to southern Germany, where the bulk of industry is. So there's a risk of an energy crunch in the coming years. And as I'll speak about later, hydrogen is a possible solution for this coming energy crunch. Thanks.
Okay, that's helpful background. Thanks, David. And yes, we'll certainly come back to hydrogen, which is of interest over here. So turning back to you, Jøran, how are things now changing in Norway as we all try to move towards decarbonisation?
So I think one key strategy in Norway is further electrification, right? So especially within the sectors of transport, the process industry, and of course also within oil and gas. Another key strategy would be and this is becoming quite clear now from the government, is to transform the service and supply industry related to oil and gas towards renewables or the green industries, to put a name on it. And of course, to be able to use the technology and the competence within oil and gas in a further development of renewables, not just in Norway, but in a global market. And of course, this is also about securing the employment in today's oil and gas industry. And I think as a result, we see growing focus on offshore wind, and especially within floating offshore wind, that uses much of the same competence and technology that is used in oil and gas today. We also see quite a lot of focus on CCS and carbon capture and storage, and that is also linked to oil and gas and the existing competence of this within this sector today. You mentioned hydrogen. That this is also kind of a third example in Norway as well. Both green hydrogen produced by wind power and to some extent also hydropower, and blue hydrogen produced by Norwegian natural gas, but then combined with CCS to reduce the total emissions. So this is kind of what we see as a result of the strategy. If we turn to oil and gas as of today, I would say that the pace of extraction of oil and gas is more or less the same for now. However, the government, I think it was yesterday, they predicted a decrease, naturally decrease in production of oil and gas with 65% in Norway towards 2050. So that this is how they see the development within extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea. But as I mentioned, is also quite a lot of focus on low emissions in the production of oil and gas. And an example is electrification of the installations in the North Sea. We have seen a lot of it already, and I think it will be also more to come during the next years, replacing then the gas turbines in the North Sea.
Okay, thanks, Jøran. You mentioned carbon capture and storage there, and I'm sure our Scottish audience would be interested to hear more about how Norway is developing in that area. I mean, over here, the UK government in a recent energy white paper committed to investing $1 billion in state-of-the-art CCS and 4 industrial clusters by 2030, but we're coming from quite a long way back. So could you tell us a bit about how it's developed in Norway?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. So as you probably know, this is not a brand new technology. It's been used in the oil and gas industry in Norway since the mid-90s, but then in more of a small scale. So I would say that CCS is a good example of utilizing technology from oil and gas to fight the climate change. In Norway, this has been a discussion a very long time, and several governments has tried to realize what you can call a full-scale CCS project in Norway. We call it Norway's moon landing of all things. So today's government now seems to succeed in their moon landing with a project named Longship in Norwegian. So this is the largest climate project in the Norwegian industry ever. And for now, it includes carbon capture at a cement factory and a waste handling facility in eastern Norway. In all, this includes 800,000 tons of CO2 per year. So the Longship project also includes, together with the capturing process, also transport and storage of the CO2 in a joint project between Equinor, Shell, and Total. So these three companies, they will transport the captured CO2 to a terminal at the west coast of Norway, and from there the gas will be pumped through pipelines to a reservoir beneath the seabed in the North Sea for storage. So I think it's 2,600 meters below the seabed. I think that was a number. So it's a quite exciting project.
Yeah.
But it's costly also. So the total cost is 2.5 billion euros. So it's not cheap. And the project will receive a state aid of 1.7 billion euros. So the industry will own and operate this project, and the Norwegian state will provide sufficient support then to get the job done. I think, and it's said several times from the government as well. A very important aim in this is to connect also other carbon capture facilities across Europe to the storage facility in the North Sea. So this is stressed by the government that this is something that other countries in Europe must follow and take use of this technology being developed in this Longship project. It's crucial for the overall success of the project. So I know that there are several discussions on this between the Norwegian government and governments of other countries. And also, it's worth mentioning that this project is supposed to pave also the way for clean hydrogen, because it facilitates the production of blue hydrogen from natural gas and then combined with CCS. So that is also a part of the thinking and the rationale behind this.
Okay, that's really interesting, and if we've got time in the Q&A, we can maybe pick up a bit more about that. But you've neatly linked us into hydrogen, Jøran, which David mentioned earlier. There's been a lot of publicity in the UK here over the last year on hydrogen, David. It's an area where government think long-term jobs can be established, yes. But it's not straightforward. And I just wonder if you could tell us about how Germany is going about trying to make progress in this area.
Yeah, happy to do that, and perhaps also make a connection to Scotland in that regard. I mean, it's a fascinating development. There's a lot of discussion worldwide, and there's a lot happening. Everybody's learning. Prices are coming down just as they have with solar and wind in the past, and predictions are that will continue. There was a recent Hydrogen Council McKinsey report came out that there have been $300 billion worth of hydrogen projects announced to happen up to 2030, with $80 billion worth of hydrogen projects already underway. So that just really shows you, that what's happening in various parts of the world. And Germany, like Scotland, is very serious about developing a hydrogen economy. And interestingly, both Germany and Scotland have the same targets in terms of electrolyzer capacity, so generating capacity, which is 5 gigawatts by 2030. And just to put that in context, the largest electrolyzer operating at the moment in the world is a 20 megawatt facility. I think it's in Austria. So you've got a huge way to go. In Scotland, I think, I think it's certainly, if it's a megawatt, it's a real lot. So the strategy commitment from the German government is 9 billion to be invested over the next 4 years, which is a massive amount of money. And it's already kicking off multiple demonstrator projects all over Germany of different kinds. However, the issue for Germany, as I've already said, is that there is no sufficient renewable energy to produce the amount of hydrogen, green hydrogen, that will be required by 2050. So the expectation is that 70% will have to be imported. And there are already discussions going on by the German government with countries such as Morocco, other African countries, Chile, Middle East, and so forth. 2 billion of that 9 billion from the German government is allocated to developing international partnerships, which is the reason that Scotland and Scottish Development International, Scottish Government, have got very excited about the potential for delivering green hydrogen, blue hydrogen to Germany. However, I personally have lots of questions about how that may work. We're talking really long-term scale until there's hydrogen production at scale from offshore wind in Scotland, with the repurposing of pipelines to take it to continental Europe. And the questions that arise are, how is it going to be transported? What will the competition in 10, 15 years look like? What's the pricing going to be? And there's also a point picking up on the Norwegian example. Blue hydrogen is not exactly welcome here in Germany. It's accepted, but it's seen by Germans as rather like nuclear power. You take the nasty stuff and stick it underground and hope that nothing happens. So green hydrogen is really the focus of the German government. So in my view, in terms of, this commitment by Germany and the cash that they're putting into these developments, and that cash will continue to flow. And I think there is an opportunity for Scotland to participate in this German import opportunity, but also to benefit from the world leadership, effectively, which Germany has on exporting of hydrogen technology. So Germany is the largest exporter in the world of electrolyzers and related plant equipment. So I think, what has to happen in Scotland, as I said, we're very at the beginning of this journey with hydrogen. We need to start producing green hydrogen for local use. For example, the whiskey industry is actually very interested in replacing fossil fuels with hydrogen or derivations of hydrogen. And there's an ongoing project, as you may be aware, at Port of Cromarty Firth, the so-called NOSH project, North of Scotland Hydrogen project, which is looking at supplying local distilleries with hydrogen with an electrolyzer based at the port. And I think the advantage of kicking this off domestically will be that we can start to build knowledge, build a supply chain, and be in a good position for exporting at scale when that is possible. I would say, that it's important in this regard that we do more work with German companies. We make Germany more aware of the good stuff that's been happening in Orkney and Aberdeen and so forth. We haven't really been marketing our capability or our interest to any great extent. Norway, on the other hand, there was recently a webinar here in Munich with the Hydrogen Association by the German Norwegian Chamber of Commerce, promoting a number of really interesting projects to German companies. And I think that was quite a successful event. So there's a lesson to be learned there for Scotland. So as I say, this is really the last point. Our best role in this regard at this moment in time, I believe, is to really offer Scotland as a test bed and a demonstrator opportunity for German technology partners, for example, to produce low carbon fuels from hydrogen. Marine fuels, for example, is going to be a huge industry, and I know that Norway is already quite active in this field. And I think just to give a Highlands and Islands example of the potential, I think the Orion project in the Shetland Islands has a fantastic opportunity to both provide green hydrogen for community hubs, which is the plan of the Shetland Islands Council, and at the same time to help to decarbonise the oil and gas industry, first of all in Shetland and then more widely. And I think the Orion project is a great concept, and for those that don't know about it, it would be worth taking a look at what they're planning to do there. Thank you. Okay,
thanks very much, David. And I hope the Scottish Government are listening to you, some good ideas for business development over here. The last topic I wanted to touch on this afternoon is something you mentioned earlier, Jøran, which is floating offshore. Again, it's an area which the UK government are targeting in its recent energy white paper. And obviously, we've already seen the floating offshore demonstration project, which was developed off Peterhead by Haavind, which was majority owned by a Norwegian company. So can you tell us a bit about the progress being made in Norway and floating offshore?
of course. This is something we see a huge focus on right now, and especially over the last year. I think politically, and it's often where it starts. This is a part of the strategy to transform the oil and gas service and supply industry in a green direction, as mentioned, and to secure employment. So I think this focus on offshore wind and especially on floating wind, it's not about increased electricity production. That is not the main goal. The main goal is to facilitate, for what I mentioned, to transform the oil and gas sector and to secure employment. So, as you mentioned, the Haavind Scotland project. What we have under construction now is the floating Haavind Tampen project in Norway. It's owned by Equinor, same company that's in the Scottish project. So it's based on the same technology as the 30 megawatt Haavind Scotland project, and it's it's phase 2, to call it that, for the Scottish project. So it's 88 megawatt, and it's intended to provide electricity to 2 specific oil and gas facilities in the North Sea, Snorre and Gullfaks platforms. So altogether, it will remove 200,000 tons of CO2 per year. It will be the world's largest floating offshore wind farm and the world's first floating wind farm to power offshore oil and gas facilities. And the idea is, of course, to not stop here, but continue to develop this technology. So it's funded with 230 million euros by the Norwegian state, and I think it's important to be aware that this is not the subsidies is not related to the production, but it's the technology development. That's the focus for the subsidies. So it's supposed to be, I think it's on time. It's supposed to be commissioned in the third quarter of next year. While this is going on, 2 other offshore wind areas are also opened in Norway. I think we are a bit behind Scotland on this. I have to admit that. So they opened up 1st of January this year. So there's one area for floating technology, I would say, 1,500 megawatt, and there's a second area that is more suitable for bottom fixed installation, 3,000 megawatt. And at the same time, new regulations on offshore wind came into force in Norway. It's been a tremendous interest for these areas, and projects are popping up everywhere, and we see many interesting alliances being formed to apply for licenses within these 2 areas. And of course, I think that the players here, they are running a bit too fast, because the regulatory framework around this in Norway is still in the making, I would say. It's a bit too early, but I think the government is doing the best they can, and I think they were taken a bit by surprise to see the interest for this. I think there will be no auction-based licensing system in Norway on this. It will be more of a qualitative system, the same as we have on onshore wind, and that is different from many other countries. And it's important also to emphasize that there is no subsidies offered in this, but still the interest is huge. So it's no subsidies, at least related to production of electricity. Any subsidies you can get is related to the development of this new technology, and of course, in particular to the floating projects. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jøran. I appreciate time has been relatively short, but that's been really interesting to hear from you on 3 specific topics there, to both of you. Nikki, how are we dealing with questions? Are you back on? Do you have any questions? Are we doing this jointly with the previous panelists? Do you want me to ask a question in the interim?
David, I am here. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, I can see myself, so I'm hoping that at least somebody can hear me. Thank you very much, gentlemen, all three of you. That was an incredibly interesting discussion and really good to hear the other, just how anyone else is doing it. I do have some questions, and in fact, one for you. If I can just find this, Jøran, from a fellow Norwegian who is living in the Highlands of Scotland. And this is from Tor Jurstad. Tor says, when I was looking up which countries produce the most renewable energy, Germany came first. You'll be very proud of that, David. But Norway wasn't in the first 10. And then I found the 98% statistic for Norway that you mentioned. Why is there discrepancy in that statistic? Now, I don't know if you have an answer for that, but if you do, then we'd love to hear it. Putting you on the spot there.
Yeah, I guess that's depending on if you look at the percentage or the terawatt hours being produced.
Of course. So that's where the discrepancy comes there. It's the percentage.
I guess so, yeah.
Okay, because David was giving you a great thumbs up there for marketing beautifully to Germany, but not necessarily to the rest of the world. But Tor, I hope that answers your question. Tor has another question, and this time it's for David. If the UK had the political will in the past, could the UK currently be on a par with Germany for renewables? Again, maybe an unfair question to give you, but you may have some insight there that the rest of us don't, that you're willing and happy to share.
I think it's probably two reasons why that's pretty unlikely. One would be the financial side of things. I mean, the development of onshore wind was heavily subsidised, and bill payers are still stumping up for that, quite unhappily, actually. Huge cost to electricity users, but a great result. And I guess the other reason is what I said earlier, that you have fantastic engineering capabilities in Germany, and all these products and all this equipment has to be imported into the UK, whereas in Germany, you make it here, you build it here, you install it here. And I think, those are things that are just political will on the financial side, I guess, but you can't create a manufacturing industry, from the low base, which is what you can't do it
from scratch overnight. Yeah, really good point there. Thank you very much for that. John Bedwell has been in touch. Just before we invite our panellists from the previous discussion in, I'll just leave this one out, throw this one out there. John Bedwell's been in touch. Much talk about macro scale investment in green hydrogen, and earlier issues about getting the growth in wind power to where it's needed, grid issues example. Is there not a case for many more micro scale projects as a potential to deal with the use and distribution of energy on a much more localised basis for home heating and transport? Any volunteers to jump in for that one?
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, I would just refer back to what I said about the Orion project on Shetland, which is exactly that. Or you could look at what they've been doing in Orkney. I think there is very much a case for that. And there is equipment available and companies manufacturing electrolyzers at smaller scale than, say, Siemens is making, which would be very suitable, just like is being done in Aberdeen on transport. So without a doubt, it needs to begin as a domestic industry in Scotland and then expand to be a scale industry.
To begin as domestic and then expand for scale. Thank you very much for that. I hope that answers your question. Thank you for that. I'd like to invite now, just widen the discussion a bit, if we may, and invite Robbie Kernigan and Graham Nisbet from the previous discussion. I'm just hoping that they'll pop up on my screen. And yes, there they are. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Is Robbie there as well? Just joining, and there he is. Great. Great to have you on board, and thank you very, very much for joining us. I hope you've been enjoying as much as you have been able to of the conference today. I'm going to dive right in with a question, if I may, for Robbie and Graham, but any of you may join in if you wish with this. It's from Lloyd Edwards, and it's about, well, I'll just read the question. Given the huge CO2 emissions from wetlands and former wetlands, grouse moors and farming, is there more that the Scottish Government can do here? Robbie, I'm going to throw that one at you first up. Nature Scott.
Is there more we can do in relation to land use and climate change? Is that broadly?
I guess that's what the question is. Yes.
Well, hopefully from our discussion earlier, you will have picked up that there is an awful lot we can, should, and probably must do if we're going to get to these very challenging targets by 2030. Quite a lot of the discussion today, rightly so, has focused on renewables and all of the progress that we have made in Scotland and more widely in renewables. But as we continue to make inroads into energy and transport and housing and all of those things which we referenced earlier, the focus does come into land use and farming and agriculture. And I think that's one of the reasons I've focused primarily on peatlands in some of our discussion, the importance of peatlands and wetlands and the organic soils in storing, sequestering and preventing carbon emission, hugely important. And whilst peatlands might not be as sexy as trees or turbines, it is hugely important to understand the importance of protecting habitats and soils like peatland, because at the moment, I think the peatland resource in Scotland stores 7,000 metric tonnes of equivalent of carbon dioxide. And as of 2022, when we see the index for those emissions begin to include wetlands, we know that 70% of peatlands in Scotland are actually net emitters. So those issues need tackled, and that needs investment, and it needs investment in land. And hopefully you've got a flavour of that through our session.
Yeah, so investment into the quality of these peatlands and wetlands is as important as anything else, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Does anybody else want to come in on that at all? Graham?
Yeah,
yes.
I think, in terms of the investment, or can the public sector do more? I think for me, as I touched on earlier, this is around taking a lead. It's around giving strong policy direction. But the scale of the investment required here, and as Robbie's just touched on, 70% of peatland is degraded in Scotland. The public sector cannot do this on its own. It can't be expected to fund this on its own. And I really do think there needs to be, and there are opportunities around for the public sector, the private sector rather. But I do think there's the private sector does have to play a large part in this, and I believe is genuinely keen to do so.
Can I just ask, we touched in our discussion, Graham and Robbie, about green investment, offsetting emissions by buying carbon credits as great opportunities for companies. But is that not, maybe I'm just being too simplistic, but is that not cheating a bit? Instead of just offsetting by obviously paying for this investment in peatlands and wetlands and woodlands, should the focus not be so much more on not emitting in the first place? Is that too simplistic?
Well, no, I'm not sure it's necessarily too simplistic, but I think that most of the emission schemes are a bit of a carrot and a stick. So we have a cap that certain companies and certain industries have to achieve, and that cap gets reduced over time. So emissions will reduce over time, but in the interim, using carbon offset can mitigate against some of the emissions that are still ongoing. There should, all things being equal, it should balance out as technologies develop and get to scale. Again, one of the points that's been touched on already.
Thank you. At the start of the conference today, Rosanna Cunningham was talking about people and communities. Finlay, just before lunch, was talking about the importance of these as well, and how people's rights are right up at the Greenpeace told us that people's rights are right up front and centre of everything that Greenpeace's legal agenda is all about. I'd like to ask what the situation is in Norway and Germany as far as people and communities are concerned. Jøran, do you want to take that one first?
Are you then addressing the overall situation on the climate threat or on the renewable projects?
Either or. How would you prefer to answer that?
No, I think it's interesting to see the debate in Norway that has risen over the last couple of years. There seems to be a conflict between the climate threat on the one side and the more local impact on the renewable energy projects on the other side. This has been really hard to handle for the authorities. So it's been a lot of pressure on the Norwegian government to stop projects, also projects that has being under construction. And as a lawyer, we've seen a lot more legal processes. The projects that has been dragged to court, one after the other, in an attempt to stop onshore wind projects and also hydropower projects. And this has been something developing over just the last 2 years. So I think we have a real challenge also in Norway to kind of to draw the big picture, to say, and you touched upon it earlier in the conference, to see how to see the big picture on climate and being able to do something about it locally as well. I don't have the answer on this. It's interesting, and I think it will only develop more and more in Norway to some point, I guess. So that is something that we as lawyers also see and are involved in every day now, and especially on onshore wind.
Yeah, thanks, Jøran. It is a big question, and it's an interesting topic, something we could probably have a whole other conference about. David Scrimgeour, Germany, what is the situation? How are people and communities being brought along with this move to renewable energies?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, one of the reasons that onshore wind developed so rapidly was because it was actually managed by local communities. So a local bank would fund together with, or establish a fund which would be invested in by professionals, typically for a return of 7 or 8%. And that's really how all over Germany, these smaller wind parks developed. So you did have a community effect there. I would say what's happening now is that there is obviously political and emotional reaction to climate change. But I don't see it coming down to community level. In my view, that's partly because the Green Party has kind of lost focus on the whole climate change issue in Germany. And maybe just one last point. I think what the Scottish Government does in terms of a just transition is really very striking. Because I think it's a topic, certainly, I don't know about Norway, but certainly here in Germany, it's not perceived, climate action is not really perceived as needing to have that element to it. So it's something that Germany and other countries, no doubt, could learn from Scotland. This emphasis on inclusion and a fair transition, I think, is very impressive.
Well, it's nice to see that the learning is not all one way and not all us learning from you. David Bowen, I think you had your hand up at one point there. You may just have been adjusting something on your screen, but I was wondering if that was...
No, I was actually going to make a contribution, Nikki. So, no, I think it's interesting. And in some ways, what has been said in Germany and Norway, I think applies in England. And the UK government, certainly the current one and the previous Conservative administration, have struggled with the idea of onshore wind because it's been so unpopular amongst their constituents in Middle England, and therefore have shunted as many turbines offshore as possible. And by continuing to subsidise that, it has achieved the great feat of making the UK a world leader in relation to that. But that's ostensibly why it happened. Whereas in Scotland, there has been a lot more favourable viewpoint of onshore wind. And I think what the Scottish Government are doing, because you don't hear much about this just transition from Westminster, I think what the Scottish Government are doing is really important. What they are saying is, we need people and communities to buy into this. We're not just going to push it all down from on high. And if we can get that buy-in, we're going to be a lot more successful. So we're going to ask people what they would like and try and go down that route rather than having the views determined by certain sections of the party. So I think it's an area where Scotland can justifiably be proud, but it's only the start of the process. We have to do a lot more.
It's yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Taking people with you it's always easier to govern people who wish to be governed in that particular direction, and working together with a commonality is always going to produce better results. I've been asked to ask you all this. This is a question that David Bone, I posed earlier when you were in this panel discussion, and this is again from Lloyd Edwards. We were talking about money that has been earmarked for projects. Now, these don't specifically relate to Norway and to Germany, but you will be aware perhaps of HS2, the massive amount of investment and money that's going into motorway expansion across the UK and into nuclear energy. Where would you prefer to see the money spent? I'm going to come to you first, Robbie, on this, because I suggest that you may not be in favour of motorway expansion, HS2 and investment into nuclear energy, but perhaps I'm second guessing you.
Well, that's an interesting. I wasn't ready for that one, but I will give you my best. I mean, I think what I did earlier was shamelessly use the opportunity to highlight the links between climate and nature, and I think it is important that those links are explicit and understood, because one of the reasons for doing that for me was that everything that you do for nature is good for the climate, but not everything you do for the climate is necessarily good for nature. And I think that's really important distinction for me, because as I said earlier, we're really looking for win-wins in renewable energy development, but understanding the demand is key to that, and how we secure, I think, good locations for well-designed, viable energy projects whilst increasing, I think, and strengthening our climate resilience and delivering for nature. We can do. But it does require a seismic shift and everybody to ask really difficult questions about where we put nature in the heart of our decision making. I would like us to put it front and centre, and indeed I think we do need to do that. So that would throw questions about actually whether or not we need to expand some of those already earmarked infrastructure projects, or can we do them in a much more nature friendly way.
So nature first. Jøran, is there the same sort of tug, shall I say, or tussle in Norway?
Yeah, of course, it's the same questions, and of course I would say that we need to realize the good projects. It could be a good wind project. It could be a good hydropower project also in Norway. So it's all about finding the right locations, finding the municipalities that is supportive to the project, and I think we need to admit that in Norway, at least, we have been a bit too quick with positioning the projects in some places that has been wrong. We need to admit that. So there's a consideration now adjusting the regulations to involve at least the municipalities more than before. So that's a good idea.
So it's back to people and places then. And David Scrimgeour, Germany, same issues, and anything more to add?
Not really. I mean, I think it's a bit different here because of the federal structure and the size of the country, as I said earlier. So, decisions are made regionally on projects. So you don't tend to get these big national projects that create opposition. It tends to be something you vote on as an elector, as a voter, in your election about what the local regional government is planning to do.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for all your contributions. Thank you for joining us, for your time, for your expertise this afternoon. Really appreciate it. I've got my eye on the clock and I see that we are running a little bit out of schedule. So if I can ask you all, accept our thanks and turn your cameras off. I'll dismiss you from the stage and we shall catch up with you again shortly. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is time now.